Ann Leary and Dan Jones, can you come up, please, and join me on the stage? Thank you both so much for coming up from New York today. It's so good to have you here. It's
Thank
fantastic.
you.
Yeah,
Thanks
it's a pleasure.
for having us.
So Ann is the author of the essay that you just saw portrayed on screen. And I just wanted to start by asking you, what is it like to watch Tina Fey play you on TV?
Well, it was very exciting to hear that Tina Fey was going to be playing the character loosely based on me. But it was very exciting. And I've seen it once before with Dan at the New York Times, and now this was the second time. So I felt self-conscious watching it with others. But,
you guys liked it, right? And Dan, you also have a cameo in this episode. Did you guys spot Dan? Did anyone raise your hand if you spotted Dan? No. Oh my gosh, one person. I did, but only because you told me, even though I knew it was coming. Tell us where you can find you if you know where to look.
Yeah, I actually have two cameos, one in this episode and one in, I think it's the 6th episode. But this one was very minor, but it was a testament to how good I was as an extra that no one notices me. And when I was showing this, the versions of this to my son in our living room, and I actually said, I'm in this scene beforehand, and then the scene played, and he was like, where were you?
I think you showed me you when we watched it in your office.
Yeah,
but this time I was looking and I didn't see you because that John Slattery kept hogging all the
it's a breakout performance as an extra.
Truly. And so, Anne, obviously, as you say, it's a loose adaptation of your story. How accurate is this to sort of the piece that you wrote in your experience?
In some ways it's accurate, but the essay is 1,500 words. So, and that's a half an hour long episode. So I would say, of course, Sharon Horgan had to add, I didn't have scenes in the essay really, and also I didn't really detail what the issues were in our marriage. It was true that I was writing about like a rough patch in our marriage, and but I didn't detail what the problems were. So she created some, and so that watching it, I was kind of thinking, well, that's not really, but it's fine because it is an adaptation, and it is. I actually thought I was really pleased with some of the decisions she made, and I think I said that to you afterwards. I was interested in because I'm interested also in screenwriting and how in her I'm interested in the decisions she made with what little she had to work with, which is a short essay. So I'm really excited. This is the only one I've seen, so I'm excited to see the others too. So.
Yeah. And what moments stand out to you the most as you watch it, either in good ways or in like, ooh?
The tennis moments I loved because that honestly I thought they were funny, and we're not close friends with John Slattery, but we do know him, but we share mutual very close friends. And at watching it, I think our very mutual friend might have told him a little bit about the way Dennis plays tennis. But that part was kind of accurate. But so I think I enjoyed those parts. But frankly, I just enjoyed, those are two of my favorite actors. So who wouldn't enjoy that something I wrote? It was different than having a work of fiction adapted because it's, I wrote an essay. It was a personal essay, and now there's people playing it, and it's, so that was a little bit different. But, yeah.
Yeah, and Dan, I remember talking to you about this essay because we've also featured it on the podcast, and some of you may have heard it there, read by Connie Nielsen. And in your commentary, I was listening back to it, and you said that Anne's was a perfect essay. And I agree with that. I mean, it's just beautifully structured and written. And what is it about Anne's piece that you love so much and that made you say, this is an essay that should be adapted for television?
I did say that, and I've said it more than once in different forums. It's just it's a model of how an essay can work on so many layers, and I'm proud of this episode because which essays were adapted wasn't up to me. I was consulted and provided sort of groups of essays based on different themes and experiences and my sort of rough idea. I've never worked in television, so my rough idea of what might work. But this was an essay, one of the few essays that I pushed for that they did take on. But I was worried about it because the essay works at a very subtle level, and it's about, and this tennis metaphor is that's so beautifully and organically done in the essay is not. You can compete in a marriage, or you can be on the same team, or play to each other's advantage. And I've read like 120,000 personal essays in the last 15 years or something, and I don't learn. A lot of them don't teach me very much. They're windows into lives, but they don't teach me very much. And this one taught me, a lesson about marriage that I think about all the time. But to have that lesson work in an episode, I was like, how are they going to make that work? And they don't hit you over the head with it. They sort of let it play out. But I think it's beautifully done and hilarious. Some reviewer called it the most perfect 28 minutes of television you'll see this year. So I thought, going from the perfect essay to the perfect 28 minutes of television is pretty good. Yeah, it's not bad.
The trifecta of Sharon Horgan, John Flaherty, and Tina Fey had something to do with that. But
yeah, Sharon Horgan, of course, who is the director and star of Catastrophe, which, if you haven't seen it, is also extraordinary and perfect television. And, Anne, I wanted to ask you, we caught up with you on the podcast, at which point it had been about 6 years since this essay, Rallying to Keep the Game Alive, had been published. But it's been about a decade, right, since the rough patch in your marriage that you write about in the piece. So can you catch people up a little bit on just what's happened in your relationship since then?
We're divorced.
Spoiler alert.
I'm not pleased with this at all. No, not... in what way?
Well, so I remember asking you, like, you told me that you were worried about what would happen when your kids left home, and you said
that's what, yeah,
that you were concerned about that, and then I think you said that actually it's been amazing, and your home is now like a hedonist temple.
Yes, yeah, no, it was. We didn't realize we were what I have actually written about this since. We actually didn't realize how we were always on our best behavior around the kids because I think some people are naturally, very honest and altruistic and kind, and we're not really like that. But we had to act that way for 20 years because we had these two young people who we wanted to believe that's the way to be in this world, and also not to swear and So once we left, it was the slow. Oh, also just watching TV during meals we never did, and then the last one left, and we just started watching TV and like eating like slobs and just. Walking around with our underwear and not having people thinking it's disgusting. It became very freeing. And as many people might know if they're our age, sometimes the kids come back. And then it's like, oh, and then they want you to behave the way you once did. And that's been an issue. We were never really like that, not the nicest people. But I think I like that came across in the essay was that is part, it doesn't have to be a part of a marriage, but it was part of our marriage, was the children. And I think one thing that happened after the essay was published in the New York Times was I got a lot of emails from people saying, I think I'm in a penguin marriage. And it turned out I wasn't the only one who watched that film and thought that. Which was I thought that film was very touching to me. But the part where I don't know if you all saw the film, but there's a part where they only are together for the thing, and one of them drops the egg, and it's the saddest moment in cinema as far as I'm concerned, because it says in the narration. The egg is broken. The partnership is severed forever. And the penguins are like, look at each other like, okay, talk to you later. It's very sad.
I love that phrase so much. There are two things. The idea of the penguin marriage is something I think about all the time. And then the idea of living in a relationship that's like a hedonist temple is something I also think about all the time. And, I wanted to ask you too, one of the things I love about your essay, and that also comes through, I think, in this episode, is that it's sort of about like turning points and how small acts can be, in fact, turning points and can end up changing your marriage, your relationship. And, what to you was the moment where, because of course we start this episode with the scene where you're deciding that your marriage is over. Like, what was the moment where you both realized, like, maybe we can save our marriage and like we're turning it around?
Honestly, I think it was in the essay, but it was the moment when we were so afraid of it. We've been together we met here in Boston in 1982. I've been living together pretty much since then. So we've been together a long time. And so I think for a long time, we worried that things weren't working well. And so I think we were in marriage counseling. And at one point, there did come a time when we were both like, you know what, it's over. And we had been so afraid of saying that. And it was so... Afterwards, everything changed. It was like the air changed, everything. It was so seismic. It was hard to believe that the world was even, still, I was about to say revolving, moving, turning. But it was it was a relief. And as soon as we said it, and we were still whole and like nothing, things got better like pretty soon. So we didn't ever even, we moved on from that. And then years later, I wrote this essay and I had to tell the kids, hey, we had this time when we were having a bad time. I wouldn't have written it probably if we hadn't stayed together, but I thought it was important. I love the Modern Love column. It's the first thing I read on Sundays. But I thought it was important to write about, people don't often write about, they write about marriages that have problems after they divorce, but not often after they don't divorce, and that people still have, people still have problems in marriages, and people can truly hate one another in a marriage, and then the marriage can remain and survive it and improve or and thrive no matter what. So anyway, that was what I wanted to get across, and because we were so past it, nobody really cared, even though I thought there would be a lot of people worried about it. Maybe once they see maybe they never read it, like most of my family and my things that I write. Maybe when they see the TV show.
Well, how did your kids react? Did they, when they read the piece, or maybe read the piece, ostensibly read the piece, did they, were they horrified? Were they
No, they actually were touched. I have to say, they were both touched. Now they will probably be, they're old people now, so they don't care. They don't care. But yeah, no, they thought it was sweet.
Yeah.
They weren't bothered because I really didn't really mention them much in the essay.
Yeah. And then do you and Dennis still play tennis?
Sorry?
Do you and Dennis still play tennis?
We do, yes. We do play tennis. I play tennis a lot more, but we do play tennis. And I think a lot of couples, if anyone plays tennis, we don't play often. If we play like mixed doubles, we will not be partners. But that's a lot of married people. So I will play against him, but not necessarily with him as a partner. Because it's just, you don't cut each other as much slack as you might another partner. Just putting that out there. Might just be us.
And is it Dennis tennis or is it real?
Yeah, so that's funny because that was a thing that a friend of ours coined, that phrase, because it was, his thing was like he didn't know how to serve, so it wasn't fair. And it's funny now, he wouldn't, but it wasn't funny at the time. I think I said in the essay, he had these rules that would change mid-game, and so it was just whatever. Now he does, he's learned the rules, and it's, been a process.
Who wins?
Both of us do. I mean, we both came to tennis. We didn't grow up playing tennis. I actually am quite obsessed with tennis, but I just started playing not long ago, so it's really fun for me to learn it. I'm really into it, but for him, it's just like a workout.
And Dan, I sort of wanted to step back and ask you a little bit because you have seen the Modern Love column become a podcast and now become a television show. Like, what has it been like for you to see these columns evolve through different mediums, as it were?
I mean, I can't even say it's been a dream come true because I never quite imagined that this would be happening. And, you know, it's interesting for me because when I'm doing the column as an editor, I don't have as much of an emotional response as I think the audience or the readers do. And even some of the pieces that have just been devastating, like in particular the You May Want to Marry My Husband was Amy Krauss Rosenthal, who was about to die and was writing an essay sort of as a dating profile for her husband to sort of sell him to someone when she was gone. And that piece came in, she died 10 days after it was published, but it was a real rush to get into the column, and it was just sort of problems all along the way for me. Like it was like, how do we get this in? How do we get it edited when she is in this condition? And so I didn't really have an emotional response, and that's frequently the way it is with my job. And the audience gets to have that. And now, but this started with the podcast. I feel like I'm a consumer of the podcast, and now I'm a consumer of someone else's work. Like they were the ones who had to do the work, and now I get to appreciate it. So for me, it's like it takes work that I've been involved with and delivers it back to me in a way that I can appreciate really almost for the first time, and that's been fantastic. I've loved everything having to do with this show. It's been great.
Yeah. And can you give people a sense of the other episodes? There are 7. Like, tell us a little bit more about sort of just the rest of the show and how it is presented.
So there are 8 episodes, all half an hour long. Ann's episode falls in the middle of that. Each one is based on an essay, and some are pretty close to the original story. And a couple of them in particular veer a lot. Like it really just took this original situation and then sort of created a whole story from that. It was all shot in New York, even if the stories didn't originally take place in New York. All shot in New York last fall from late September into early December. It was about 1 week per episode, 6 days per episode, I think. And then I don't want to give anything away in the final episode, but they gave some thought to having the essays overlap or touch each other in a way that sort of becomes clear by the end. And much like with the podcast, I feel like there was an earlier approach to turning Modern Love into a TV show that didn't work. And this was about 6 years ago. And they created this sort of artificial situation where it was based around actually me, like the Modern Love editor and his falling apart marriage and family life. And then there was going to be another cast. Then each episode had a sort of B story of an essay. Whatever essay I was working on, then that sort of came to life. And, I thought it was good, but it didn't turn out to be that good, and didn't.
Was it cast? Who played you?
Eric Stoltz.
Oh.
It had a good cast. They shot an hour-long pilot, and it didn't go anywhere from there, and it totally broke my heart. But it was a good thing that it happened because this approach is so much truer to the source material, and that sort of cast of me and the other people at the Times and my wife who was leaving me and all this stuff, like that was all just invented. And this it's faithful to the stories and it celebrates the stories. And I just think they've done a phenomenal job with it. John Carney sort of has the right sensibility for the whole project. He's like a romantic, but he appreciates the complications of love.
Yeah, and John Carney, for those of you who don't know, directed almost all of the episodes, right? Not this one.
Directed 4 of them. Directed and wrote 4 of them, 4.5. Yeah, and then other guest directors did the others.
Yeah, and I want to turn to audience questions in just a minute, but I guess I wanted to ask Ann, to you, like, what's the best part of this strange experience been for you of writing the essay and seeing it adapted across all these different forms.
Well, I love who was cast in this. I heard about it, and I didn't think it was quite true. I was very excited. I'm a huge fan of Tina Fey and John Slattery, so that was exciting. It's all been exciting. It's like, I think I said to Dan, it's like the little essay that could. I mean, I wrote it, wasn't a major undertaking writing it, but then the Modern Love column has become a podcast. It's just so many, and there's an anthology that I hope many of you will buy afterwards.
Available in the lobby.
And Dan will be signing them. But yeah, no, so it's kind of it's been exciting. For me, it's exciting. I've always wanted to write a Modern Love column. I love the Modern Love column. So it was, that was actually probably, and I'm not even saying this, that was the most exciting, to be true, was that you wanted to publish that essay that I wrote. So it's all been gravy from there.
And Dan, what's the best part been for you of the whole crazy ride of this show? Because it has been
hard
crazy.
Question.
I check in with Dan every so often, and
I pitched early on. They were looking for a way to tie the episodes together, and I said, you should have me delivering a pizza in every episode. And they didn't go for that. But that's set in motion, me being an extra in 2 scenes. And in one, I was a featured extra, which meant you can sort of hear my voice a little bit. And I'm walking down the sidewalk, and it's at least 5 seconds long. And I got paid $1,000 for that, and it took 4 hours. So actually just being on the set was a total thrill.
that's amazing. I love it. All right, so we're also going to take audience questions, and we're going to do it using an interactive program called Slido. And I'm told that you shouldn't worry because it's very simple and there's nothing to download. So if you go on your phone to slido.com, not to encourage you to take your phones out, but like take your phones out, and enter the code. There's a code I don't think it's up on the screen. Oh, yes, it is. Hooray. There it is. Hashtag ML106 for Modern Love, October 6th, today's date. And you can submit your questions throughout the conversation, and you can also upvote the ones that you like. So please send them in. We'll try to get to as many as possible.
What do we do until they figure this out?
There are several that have come in already, and I just need to. I know people out there are like on it.
People are very Sligo savvy.
Okay, so first question is.
Edit them before you read them for mean people.
Don't worry. I always. Okay, so Anne, was it difficult or cathartic or both writing an essay where your personal life is so on display?
Again, it was after the event, the part of my life I was writing about. It was afterwards. I don't know that it wasn't cathartic. It might have been informative, actually. It kind of it made me go back and look at a thing that happened in a way. And then I always find writing personal essays interesting and challenging, and also satisfying to do because of how concise one must be when writing an essay. So I had to try to get across a lot of emotion in a really concise way. So I honestly don't even remember your question, but I hope that somehow answered it
perfectly. And Dan, so let's see. Interesting. I like this question. With the column, podcast, and now the television show, what else do you see in the future for Modern Love? These are tough.
What else do I see? I honestly don't have
clothing line.
Thanks for mentioning that. Yeah, we're doing
Oh my God, are you?
Along with the show. So Brian Ray is the longtime illustrator of the column, and he's really beloved for his sort of fresh style and pastel colors, and but his work has become sort of a defining look of the column, and we're doing this really sort of high-end merchandising with his art all over it, including pajamas.
I was just joking.
Oh, no. So the next phase is really a clothing line of modern love clothing that includes hats and T-shirts and pajamas, tote bags, and tattoos.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Tattoos?
Like, the kind of tattoos that you just like put on with water.
And there's going to be a pop-up museum, I heard. There.
Yeah, there's a pop-up museum called the Museum of Modern Love in Lower Manhattan that will run for 4 days from the 10th of this month until the 14th of this month. That will have exhibits, installations for each episode, including Ann's, which I can't remember what the approach was for Ann's, but they're interactive exhibits. And I guess the other thing I wanted to mention about Modern Love is we've started a new project called Tiny Love Stories, which we started a year ago, and they're 100-word love stories with a picture. And I have to say, this is the project that I'm most pleased with myself about, because this was really just my idea, unlike these other things, which are other people's ideas. And it was sort of a risk. It was just like we were worried people would just send in how we met and have a picture of them at their wedding kind of thing. And we do get that, but there have been so many really moving entries of, condensing a love story into 100 words. And so that's taken off and is doing well. And we do it every week, 4 or 5 of them every week. So I think the future is a love story, that just gets shorter and shorter and shorter until it's barely there.
Until it's a tweet.
Right.
Modern love haiku.
Yes. I love that. And there's a question, which is, how did you meet Dennis? Is that a story you want to tell?
I was attending Emerson College. I was a writing major, and he was teaching a comedy writing class that I was encouraged to take. And I took it. I didn't want to be a comedy writer, but I took it for fun. And he had just graduated. Whatever. It's like he was the teacher of a class I took. But it was a different time.
Did you wait until after the class was over, or did you not?
We did actually, but we were friends. It was a really fun class. So it was, but we did not, until after the class, until the first class was over. No, that didn't happen.
That's amazing. I did not know that. There's a question for you, Dan, which is, can you give us the story about how the Modern Love column came to be in the first place?
I'll try to make it really short. The really short version is my wife, who's a writer and editor, Kathy Hanauer. We were having a rough patch in our marriage. And instead of playing tennis, she decided to edit a book about that difficult stretch, which was called The Bitch in the House. And it was essays from all these different women writers, about difficulties in marriage, particularly contemporary problems. And her book did so well and was a bestseller that it opened the door for me to do a male companion volume, which was called The Bastard on the Couch. And those two books together got a lot of it, especially done by husband and wife, got a lot of attention. And one person who noticed and did a story on us was the then style editor at the Times. This was back in 2004, in the spring of 2004. And they did a story on us and then had us in to pitch this idea. They said, we want to do an essay column that is similar to what you've just done in your books. So we couldn't really say no. We worked on it together for a few months, which wasn't the best thing for our marriage either. And it was really a one-person job, and she was working on a novel, so she said, you can do this for as long as it lasts. And it launched that fall, 15 years ago, October 31st, it launched.
That's amazing. Wow. Yeah. And now there are over 750, is that right? How many Modern Love essays?
You would know.
I know. I've tried to read all of them.
How many submissions would you say you get every week?
I don't really count them anymore, but the last time I tried to get a sense of how many were coming in, it was like 8,000 or 9,000 a year.
Wow.
My main concern, actually, because it went up when the podcast came out 4 years ago and drew more attention to it. And I'm a little, my only concern about this Amazon project is what it will do to our inbox. And it may not have a huge effect, but I just think that someone will see these episodes and think, oh, Anne Hathaway, I can write a story and Anne Hathaway will play me. And is that going to be tempting enough to enough people that it's just going to blow our whole system out of the water? I don't know.
Yes, very possibly. And I think this one's kind of a question for all of us, which is, I love the podcast. That's so great to hear. And this was a great episode. Can you explain a bit of behind the scenes / creative process of both and the differences? So I guess I can talk a little bit about the behind the scenes of the podcast, but if you guys want to jump in on the show, the behind the scenes of the podcast is that I try to read all of the 700 something essays that have been published in the column, and I have a spreadsheet of the ones that I think are just really special and that would make really amazing episodes of the podcast. And then I have a different spreadsheet of shows and movies that are coming out and actors that are attached to them and actors that I think are interesting and would be good. And so I do a lot of pitching of those actors and try to get them to agree to read for the podcast. Sometimes publicists reach out to us. And then I just try to match people who agree to read for us with essays that I think would be interesting for them, based on their own personal story, who the actor is, basic stuff like age and gender, but also kind of what they like to do. And then we do a pre-interview with the original author of the essay, and then I interview them on tape, and they're very generous with their time, as Anne was. And then I edit that conversation from what it usually is, which is about an hour, to about 5 minutes, and that's what becomes the final episode that you hear. But tell us about the creative process for the TV show, especially like boiling down those 750 essays into, what made it to the screen.
John Carney actually read, or at least he told me he read at least 500 of them. And the two executives from Amazon, and then there's an executive producer and me, and we just continued to sort of dump out lists of our favorites. With me, it was really just, it was hard for me to think what would work as a TV show, and they sort of encouraged me not to think that way. They just said, what do you think has, interesting? What do you think is interesting? And I don't quite know how we boiled down to a final cut. It didn't happen in a room where we were all together. I think a lot of it was just John, and when they had to get extra other directors on board, it was showing them several scripts or even just essays and saying, is there one that you would be interested in doing? So similar to the podcast in that way, like, here's the material. Is there something that I really identify with? And like Emmy Rossum directs one of the episodes, and it's about a young woman who is yearning, whose father died when she was 11, and she's it's just sort of messed her up, and her relationships with men are just a mess because of it, and she's sort of yearning for a father figure. And the episode is about her sort of blundering into this relationship with someone who's her father's age, and Emmy Rossum has those issues in her life, and so it was sort of a perfect match of her. Her sort of passions and background, and bringing it to that. And John probably wouldn't have been as good of a match for that story. So that was, that's how they sort of got paired up.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love this one, but it's putting you both on the spot. It is, what is both of your best marriage advice in one sentence? You go first.
I would say play tennis as partners instead of as competitors.
Yeah, across from each other. I think I'm no marriage counselor. Just have a sense of humor and be as. Honestly, it actually does have to do with tennis. Is be as kind to your partner in marriage as you are to everybody else. And that I think happens when you're playing doubles. If I'm playing with anybody and they screw up, if they're my partner, I'm like, oh my God, it's fine. But if it's my husband, I found I was like, why the hell did? So that maybe the analogy is that to treat one another, that as kindly as you do everyone else. I feel like in marriages that sometimes can't happen. And again, probably with very, more highly evolved people, it happens naturally. But it took me a long time to learn.
No, I think that's the universal truth of families, is that you just have
exactly
permission somehow, right?
Exactly.
So,
yeah.
I love that. And Dan, have you ever written an essay? And if you haven't, what would you write it about?
I've written essays, mostly under duress. Been asked by a magazine to say, well, what is your love story? And it just so I try to churn one out, and I don't. I'm a pretty private person. I've become less so the more I'm sort of in the public eye. But I started out writing fiction. I wrote a novel. I wrote an essay that was in my anthology, The Bastard on the Couch, that was all about chivalry and sort of the death of chivalry. And I like that stuff. I find writing so much harder than editing that I prefer editing. I loved writing a novel and felt like a big accomplishment. And then I wrote a book called Love Illuminated, and that felt like a big accomplishment. But it's a suffering process. Oh my God! I felt like it's so hard, and the ability to get someone else to write something and then you work on it with them.
It must be.
I know, no, that part's not so much fun. But having a weekly deadline and working on someone else's writing to make it clearer and better, and I never get tired of that.
I love that. And I think my screen has gone blank, so I think that's our cue to wrap up. But so last but not least, we will have some of Dan's new book, which is called Modern Love, Revised and Updated, True Stories of Love, Loss, and Redemption. They're for sale in the lobby. And Dan is also signing books, so make sure to buy them, make sure to chat with Dan. And thank you all so much again for coming tonight. It's been so wonderful to see you all here.
Thank you.